I think now in 2023, we all know the importance of slowing down. Right now, I imagine that you have contingency plan upon contingency plan and contingency plans for those plans running around in your head, right? Because as event professionals, you have to know what could happen. As I said, we all have to keep it a little weird. But how do you do that and stay present? So up next, we will have Paul Singh, who is the manager of the enterprise team. And we have Stefanie, the senior director of events from Guild, who will talk about staying in Zen mode during events. Stefanie is the Queen of Serene, and she will show us how to keep that tranquility in event planning.
Thank you so much, Jihan. Stefanie, so we've been working together for a little over 4+ years.
Yeah.
And you've seen so much in this event space. You have had a change of roles. You have done big events, small events, webinars, in person, everything. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what kind of events have you run so far?
Yeah, so I would say I had got a business degree in college thinking, okay, I'm gonna go into sales and I'm gonna rock it and try to take the footsteps of my mom who did that and realized quickly, I was like, okay, even though I'm doing all, am I feeling like I'm fulfilled? I don't really know, so I took a step back. I was a student athlete in college, so I did more of like a sports journalism turn. I worked for the West Coast Conference, which was a nonprofit. And I started just writing, and then after a while, because it's a nonprofit, there were 12 of us in the house, and we had to wear a ton of different hats. My boss came up to me after like a couple of years and said, you have a marketing degree, don't you? Can you help us with some marketing campaigns? And then it turned into more of the marketing side. And then it became, you play tennis in college, right? Can you run our tennis championships? And I'm like, what is this role? Like, it's just evolving. But that was really like the first step into what I thought were events, but in a different capacity, right? It was running tennis championships, NCAA basketball championships. Then it was Hall of Honors. Before you knew it, 6 years later, I was like, okay, what's next for me? Then moved into the corporate space, doing more like the tech, and that's where we met at OSI Soft. Again, started small, doing field marketing events. Then it was internal events. Then before you knew it, we were doing big global conferences. The last one, Isela, actually, who I used to work with, we ran our 3,000 plus conference at the Moscone Convention Center. So it's really been quite a gamut, and never thought I was going to end up in this role, like in this career, and I just feel very, very blessed to be in it because it's a very different space. I don't think a lot of people don't really understand what event planning is unless you're in it and what it has to offer. But we have these opportunities like these where we can kind of build communities for other people, but also for ourselves. Like we really have like a cool opportunity to build stuff and see it come to fruition. And so I just feel very lucky to be in a role like this. But yeah, since then I was there for almost like a decade in the tech space and then just moved to Guild, which is a totally different thing, and have been there for the last 3 months.
Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about Guild. I saw some advertisement and it's just been really amazing seeing what you guys are doing there, but tell us a little bit about Guild.
Yeah, so Guild, it's really trippy because it was a little bit of a serendipitous thing. I think they saw my background was in education to start and then with tech, and this is an ed tech piece. So what's really cool about it, it's very mission-based, and I figured if I'm gonna be working crazy hours, I wanna do it for a place that has like a huge, huge impact. And so what Guild does is it partners with huge companies, 10,000 employees and above. You're talking like the Walmarts, Target, Disney. And our goal is really to get their frontline workers education for free as a benefit. So folks who are maybe cashiers at a Walmart that didn't get their secondary degree, how do we get them free tuition and how do we get the employers to help fund that? So it's really to help build some of that economic mobility, starting with education first. And so we do a ton of events, smaller ones. It's a very different animal. It's a late stage startup. So like literally building the plane as we fly it, which has no dull moments, by any means. But it's very it's kind of back to my roots of wanting to do something that has a huge, huge impact and just really writing it out right now and seeing what we can build together. So looking forward to it.
Awesome. This conversation actually started between us about your events when Chris Sykes and I were at a Viva World 2022, yeah. And it was a massive event. We had you had 3,000 attendees, 160 speakers. There were so many sessions. Isela was there. The whole team you guys took us backstage. We had such a great time, amazing food. We were dancing on the dance floor with other attendees, speakers, sponsors. So it's such a high stress moment running such large events. And at the same time, your team was having a great time. It didn't feel like your team was under stress, but we know that events are stressful. So how do you manage and run those events at keeping such cool in that sort of Zen moment and in the Zen mode? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it's, I don't know, I'm not gonna be up here and be like, I'm the Queen of Serene and like I have a full like answer to all of this, but what I will say is like from a Zen perspective, it's two-piece. Like one is like the team aspect. I mean, of course, I came from college athletics, so like my brain works in this like player-coach mentality where you have to, as the coach and like the event lead and the manager, you have to show that you have things under control. I think when people see the event lead in stress and frantic, it creates a whole different atmosphere for everyone that's there. And it's not to say that you have to fake it till you make it. I think it's really just being an example to say, I have trust in myself in what I can do. I have trust in the team that I've chosen around me. And when I say the team, I don't even just mean your colleagues. I'm talking about all the people you're working with cross-functionally within the company, the vendors that you choose. You know, like Swoogo is a big part of that. Like I don't have to worry about registration and that kind of stuff. There's so many other big fires that you have to worry about that you have to pick vendors that are really gonna be an extension of your team. So it's one, having the trust in that to like, do what you do well and then know that your team can do that. And I've always been a huge like proponent of knowing that people have strengths and weaknesses and putting people in places where they can really excel. And so I've been lucky enough to have teams of 3 all the way up to teams of 10 and to say, okay, like this person's really good at tech. This person's really good at, I don't know, like being in front of customers and like building those relationships and putting them there. So not only do they feel accountable to that space, but I can trust that. I don't have to micromanage everything. I know that person's got it, and they know when they can have the autonomy to make decisions or when they have to come to me, right? So that's one thing. And then I think personally, it's just a lot of practice. You know, we talk about Zen mode, and like I think to like the first time somebody introduced meditation to me, and I was like closing my eyes, and I was like, I can't even make it to a minute. Like I'm like thinking of like 5 million things, and I think it's just a lot of practice and prep. Like, if I can do something for an event that's 6 months from now, I'm gonna do it because I don't wanna have to worry about it. I wanna be at the event and focus on execution and not worry about like, did I book that vendor that I could have maybe booked like 6 months ago? And I think that just takes practice, you know, like it's not gonna happen overnight, and we go through a lot of adversity and you build off of that and you kind of try to be an example to your team members to do the same, so.
Wow. You mentioned about relationships, not just with your team, but also with your vendors and partners. So what would be your advice for somebody who is looking forward to building that deeper relationship with the vendors and partners they're working with, or just wants to enhance that relationship? What would you say like some of the best practices, and how do you build that?
Yeah. So one of the things I always like told my team was like, you know, when we look at vendors, we don't just look at the technology, like does it fit with our tech stack? Yes, okay, check it off and let's see how much it costs. It's also like, does the technology work? One, obviously it has to work. And then secondarily, like, do the people that are behind that technology, are they truly gonna support you? Like when shit hits the fan, do you have the number to call? Because if not, you know, it's not really gonna work. And so I've always asked my team, when you have like a technology you wanna bring on board, let's vet it first. And I mean like, phone calls with the people, you know, if you can get to the person who's gonna actually be our support person and understand, like, does the culture fit? Do you feel like your personalities would mesh? And like, if we're actually on site in an event, could you actually call that person, you know, to help you fix that? And that was what was so huge with Swoogo. It was like, I mean, I think all of us are in the room because we know that functionally, like for me, it has like opened up so many doors to like customize things that we need, like make it really easy. You can use Swoogo for literally like the smallest registration form to the biggest events to internal, like I can use it for everything. And it's just such like an agnostic and reasonable platform. But I think more importantly, like when I'm at an event or if I'm having trouble, and I shouldn't probably blast this, but I have Paul's cell phone number and I can, I can like pick up the phone and like have a real conversation and a hard discussion sometimes if it has to be, but we get through those solutions together. And I think that's a huge piece of like, making sure that things work and that these events go off without hitch is being able to do that, not just with Swoogo, but like every vendor that we're using.
Amazing. And you also mentioned about when those fires happen, I think one thing we all here can attest to is that if you have an event, there would be some sort of fire. Yeah. We had one this morning, but how do you prioritize those fires?
I mean, I think one of the things is like, I've worked at companies where I guess we would start with like, one, know your audience and know your audience real well, right? You need to understand like, what is this event for? And that's like the North Star is what I call it, and we talk with the team, like, how are we actually being measured? Is it customer satisfaction ratings? Is it the food? Like, it could be so silly, but every event is so different. And being very clear about your success metrics and then like who the audience is so that you can actually prioritize accordingly. Because I've worked at companies where it doesn't matter if 50% of the audience felt one way, if this one person felt really good about it, sometimes that was the success metric. It's not the greatest. I think there's internal education that has to happen from the events all the way up to management to be really clear about that. But if the team knows that and you're over-communicating that, then theoretically, the team knows how to prioritize and what has to move forward. But then I think also just being really realistic that like fires are going to happen and like understanding and accepting that not everything is going to be under our control, but I think the biggest thing is like prioritizing when a fire happens, and if 99% of the people in the room are feeling like they're getting what they need out of it, it's okay that like maybe the food didn't come out right on time, or the mic turned off for a quick second. It's like being able to like level that not everything is a fire, and that you can like really work your way through and balance that.
Wow. And you also find yourself now, you were just sharing earlier today that in this new role where you have changed roles and you're handling those fires and you're building relationships in this new organization. And a lot of us here, after the pandemic, have moved to more virtual, remote locations. Everybody's working more and more remote. So how do you build those relationships, handle those fires in that virtual environment versus where you could just walk into the office, stand by somebody's cubicle and hash it out? So how are you feeling about that, and how do you handle that now?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, it's hard. I mean, it's not like an easy thing. I think virtual events are a huge part of this puzzle, but they're never, no offense to Shesh, they're not going to replace in-person events by any means. I think, and it's finding a way to balance those two things together, right? You need to meet people where they're at. Some folks really don't want to come back into the office, and that's totally fine, but you also need to find a way to build the connection in person. I think that's why we're all here. I mean, we can't replace the kind of connection we're going to get at conferences like this, which is great for our job security as well, like of being able to do that. But as much as possible, like I do try to meet my team in person. I'm 100% remote now. I used to be in the office all the time. Then we transitioned to hybrid. Isel and I try to go in like once a week, and then we realized we were just on Zoom calls by ourselves in the office, since we were like, forget it, we're just gonna go back to our houses, like it's fine. And now I'm 100% remote, trying to build relationships all across the ladder, like people I work with cross-functionally all the way up to management that are literally across all of the US, and you just have to take the time to like build them. So if you can't get them in person, because I think that's really where like the shared connections happen. Something I ran into at my last job was like the only time we ever met was at an event when we were running it. And everybody's already stressed out, their mind is not there, and you don't really get the chance to like build and bond and do that before you got there. That it's just so important to find ways to meet in the middle somehow. But then secondarily, when you are virtual, which is probably 90% of the time for a lot of us now, is just remembering that we're in a people business. Like you can be in a really good event lead, but without a great team that really follows you, like it's really hard to succeed. And so a big piece for me was like trying to build that equity over time, right? Like getting on a phone call and like knowing you have 30 minutes and it's not like, okay, let's jump into business. Like, let's talk about it. It was like, that person could be dealing with so much stuff at home. Like maybe they have a sick kid, or I don't know, like they just came off a really rough call, and taking the time to like read the cues or just say, hey, like, how's it going? Like, how's your weekend? And it's like such a little ask, but really getting to know the person and knowing that it's a human on the other side and that we're human too. Like I'm not perfect, but like building that rapport over time is gonna go such a long way to make these events successful.
Wow. Along with that, you also mentioned about like in this new role, so you are meeting people remotely, and you also just changed the job. I think we were asking a lot of people around us when we were in 2020, people were switching jobs and event space was new. Now it's post-pandemic and people are changing jobs, and now the event space is, again, post-pandemic space. So what would you say are some of the challenges or benefits that you're seeing in the space? And if somebody is switching their roles at this time, post-pandemic, in the event space, what would you recommend for them?
Well, I would say just, for me personally, I think it's just a lot of listening. You know, I think there's like so much to learn of like what's been happening, going to conferences like this, meeting with people, building connections in and out of your networks is like such a huge thing. When I showed up at Guild, you know, I was like, I am not an expert in ed tech. Like I came from education, I did tech, but this is a totally different thing. And I spent probably the first 2 weeks when you actually had calendar bankruptcy for once to just like book time with a ton of people to like hear like, how does this business actually work? Like what kind of events have worked, have not? And then also trusting in your expertise to have the conversation to say, okay, I've seen that work, but I've seen other things not. Like how can we find a way to like balance our budgets, our resources, everything, and just try to be a strategic partner across the company is like a huge piece. And I think a lot of that is listening, is like understanding the business before you decide to like pitch your, you know, like events and your own internal kind of agenda. So, and then just again, the human piece, like the relationship piece is so huge. Like cultures are so important, and you know, you see it in the Swoogo people that you work with. I like to say that Guild has a really strong culture, and it takes a lot of time of like understanding that to be a part of it, and taking the time to do that.
Amazing. So Stefanie, today, if you want to leave all of us with a motto, what would that be?
Well, one motto that I like to share is like handle fire with grace. I learned that from like one of my bosses that was kind of like, here's the one extreme of like running around with like a chicken with your head cut off, and then there's the like handle fire with grace piece of there are gonna be fires, and it's just being able to walk around and just know that you can handle it, and giving your team that feeling like it's gonna be fine. Like we're, for good or for worse, we're not doctors. We're not like saving lives per se, like directly, you know, and what we do is important, but like there are so many things that can happen, and it's just being okay with the fact that like you are doing your best, and that's totally okay. And you know, being able to handle those fires with a feeling of like, this too shall pass, we're gonna work it out as a team, and then we move on. And I think just like that keep calm and carry on kind of motto is like really ringing true. And then I think just like, I think it's not really a motto so much as just like, I remember Patrick asking me like, what's the one thing you really like try to take to heart? And I think it's just handling people with care. That's for your attendees that are in the room. It's the team that's behind the scenes. Like if people aren't feeling good about where they're at, they're not gonna have a good time, and they're not gonna have fun. Like my team needs to have fun. Like these things are too stressful. You need to have a good time and balance it so that people feel like they wanna come back.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I do want to open it up for Q&A if anybody has any questions for Stefanie.
I'm sorry, the question's not for you, but can you tell us what was the fire that you put out at this meeting?
It was more of a personal fire than the event fire. Stefanie, oh, there are more questions coming.
Hey, Stefanie.
Hey.
Question, so in those stressful situations, how are you keeping your team calm when you yourself are so stressed out with everything that's going on? And with the event world, it's like everything's moving so fast when you're not even realizing that somebody could be affected by it. And how are you dealing with your team in those circumstances?
Yeah, I think it's starting, it sounds weird, but it's almost like starting with me first, right? You got to take care of yourself before you can take care of your team. And so it's like being able to take a step back and, like I said earlier, like realize that no fire, I mean, there could probably be like a huge fire that like really takes over, but like there's not a fire that's going to take down like an entire like attendee experience 90% of the time, I'd like to say. And so it's like being able to like balance and prioritize, and then also bring that sort of, I'd say like my persona seems to be like, my team always tells me like, does anything freak you out? Like, are you just this calm all the time? And like, no, not really. But like personally, I try to practice that so that I can be an example of that to my team. And then for us to practice that. I think also, just to be completely honest, like not everybody, I mean, events are hard, right? Like, and they are stressful, and not everybody is like fully cut out for events, and it's like being realistic when you're coaching people that like, here's a way for us to like maybe do that better, and it takes time and practice. But then sometimes you do find, unfortunately, like with some teams, like, okay, maybe this like is not the avenue because it's just like taking over your life. Like we don't want that, like trying to find that work-life balance as well, and like being able to be an example to others. So I think it's a lot of coaching, it's a lot of communication, being really real and genuine with your team members when things are going well and when they're not. And then just a lot of practice and like doing them. I think things hopefully just get better over time.
Here in the front.
I'm close enough. Do you have kind of like a pre-event ritual to make sure you're set up for success the day of?
Yes, my pre-event ritual. I think it's a couple things. One is like I really do lean on my team a lot. Like I do spend a lot of time talking things out, so that you feel like, okay, what are going to be like the biggest fires that I know are going to happen? And like we're prepped for that. But then personally, I mean, sleep is such a huge thing, it's hard to do. But like I just operate in a totally different mindset when I know that I've like given my time to like do what I need to do personally to like feel good. Like I have to like work out, I have to sleep, I need to take care of myself, which is really hard to do when you're at the event because you're like, that's not gonna happen, let's be real. I always bring my running shoes and I'm like, we're not gonna go to the gym this week. But like the intention is there. But I think also like I'm very much a checklist person. I'm very much like, even before here, that was perfect, the breathing exercise. Like that is just like the moment of like walking in and I wake up in the morning and I'm like, okay, we're doing it. Like, it feels very much like game time, and so that's just my ritual is like taking care of myself, being zoned in, and then being kind of prepared to take on whatever.
Right over here. So I have a question. Oh, here I am. I love your approach with the culture and the focus on the culture, not only for your attendees, but also for your staff, for your team that's supporting these events. And I was curious, do you have any examples of things that you personally do or that you have as, I don't know, part of your own rituals to make it fun for your team? Because you mentioned that, I think, specifically, that you want to try to keep it fun for your team as well. And we all know that events are stressful, especially for the people who are organizing them. Do you have any examples?
Yeah, I mean, Isela could probably share some as well. But we always just silly things, like especially like the night before the event. Like we always try to do something that's like right before the event starts and then at the bookend to really celebrate and just be with each other. It's also these little moments of like recognition. Like I try during the event to really like take the time out to be like, hey, that was awesome. Like they're like little things, but then people feel seen at the event. And then sometimes we'll do, especially if you're at a hotel or something, we try to do like a little champagne toast or something with our vendors. Like I said, like our extension of our team, it's not just us. We try to keep things very inclusive. So it's not just your like 3-person team. It's like it's the on-site staff, it's everyone. So everyone feels like at the pre-con, we're in this together. And then afterwards, we're like, okay, how did that go? We do like a post-event briefing and then we celebrate. Like we really try to be intentional about how can we have fun? We have an off-site party at our event. We did annually. And so I try to tell people, like, of course, you're not gonna rage at a customer event. But if you can spend the time to like build some relationships with some people that are there, but also like find your people and like have a drink and like have a good time. Like you planned all of this and spent so many hours, like find the time, even if it's half an hour, to just enjoy yourself. We just try to be intentional and like make sure people are doing it. Like we'll call each other and pull them for a second, just like enjoy the time for a little bit.
Hi, can you hear me? So you talked a lot about vendors being an extension of your team, and I'm curious, how do you go about selecting vendors? What do you look for?
Yeah, it's hard. And sometimes, like to be completely honest, sometimes you'll go through the whole matrix and then you're actually in it and you're like, wow, this actually is different in real life now that I've signed on. Like I'm a pure witness to that. But I think for us, there's a lot of things, right? There's the obvious, like the budget piece, like the functionality, like what does that mean? The business side of it all. But from like a extension of that, like for me, I look for testimonials. Like I do a lot of reference checking of like, give me some other customers that you've talked to. And I talk to them like when something bad happened or you needed to work through things, like are they actually trying to be proactive about developing new pieces? When you give feedback, are they hearing you or does it go into a queue and then you never hear back? And then I think also just like, I do a lot of having a lot of people, not just on my team, but the marketing operations team, some of our other groups connect with whoever it is that we're talking to. And I don't always want to just talk to the salesperson either. Like I want to talk to the customer support. It's not like a whole huge map, but it's really just to get a feel of, do we have the same sort of values when we're going into this? And if so, then we can communicate with each other and have some hard conversations when they get there, and hopefully not, but then, being able to create some balance between budget functionality, like what you're looking for business-wise, and also like you're gonna be spending a lot of time with these folks and you're putting a lot of investment in, so trying to make sure that that's the right fit.
Thank you so much, Stefanie, for taking out time today to share this with us and take out time to meet with all of us again. So really appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.